Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, liquor shills, debt slicers, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks, election watchers. I'm a useful idiot. Let's go back to the good old USA. Oh, welcome. I'm a useful idiot. Let's go back to the good old USA and talk about another puppet master in U.S. elections. And this is my second in a series I'm doing, focusing in on some players and issues and money in the election cycle. And so the other puppet master I'm going to talk about is the Democrats' version of Sheldon Adelson, my previous video topic. And this guy's name is Haim Saban. And I could be pronouncing his name wrong, but I'm not going to bother learning how to pronounce it right. His name is Haim Saban, as far as I'm concerned. And he's actually Jewish, born in Egypt, and moved to Israel in 1956. So he has a very long history with the state of Israel, and there's no surprise that he would embrace a lot of the policies of the state of Israel. But it is fascinating that we have these two giant players in American election systems, particularly when everybody's so familiar with the Koch brothers and George Soros, and they don't know about Sheldon Adelson and Haim Saban, who both contribute considerably more resources and money over the years than some of these other players. And of course, I'm going to be reading off the notes on this topic a little more than I usually do, because there's a lot of information that I think is relevant that I want to cover about Haim Saban. So listen to what I say and don't watch my eyes. So anyway, he's a dual citizen of Israel and U.S., like Sheldon Adelson and so many other people in the United States government. And but he's not as rich as Sheldon Adelson. He is 143rd richest person in the U.S. according to Forbes magazine, with total assets at $3 billion. But that doesn't hold back his generosity in the American campaign system. So in 1966, he was involved in pop music, of all things, in Israel and UK, and was in a rock band in 1969 called the Lions of Judah, but also served in the Israeli Defense Forces, and then moved to France and became a music producer. So ironic that this huge figure, or maybe it's not ironic considering he supports liberals, that he used to be a rock star in Israel. In the 1980s, he became a U.S. television producer and cartoon soundtrack music specialist. And in 1990s, he westernized Japanese shows and brought the Power Rangers to the United States. I'm sure everyone's very pleased to know who was responsible for that. And then in 2001, he and Fox News Corporation sold Fox Family Incorporated to Disney, which became ABC Family Channel, for $1.6 billion. So he's involved in a lot of American media, like Sheldon Adelson and a lot of other pro-Zionists. And then he really made a lot of money between 2003 and 2007 when he bought a German media company and then sold it. But Saban himself, just like Sheldon Adelson said, his greatest concern is the protection of Israel. And he even came out and spelled out what his formula is for manipulating and influencing U.S. politics. And this is the same blueprint, of course, that everyone uses, including Sheldon Adelson, all the pro-Zionists, and everybody else that meddles in American politics. And one of them is to make donations. Two is to establish these think tanks directing U.S. foreign policy. And then number three is to control media outlets. And so that's what all these people do. I mean, you look at Sheldon Adelson, he's a casino magnate. Why do you suppose he's interested in owning newspapers and media in the United States and Israel, other than to get involved in propaganda? And in the 1990s, Haim Saban moved to the far right. He was actually an economic advisor to the Clinton administration and remains close friends with the Clintons, in spite of having his views moved to the far right of Israel politics, I should clarify, not U.S. politics. And Saban has given $5 to $10 million to the Clinton Foundation. And in the 2000 election, he was the fifth top donor. So like I say, even though he has a mere paltry $3 billion, he was the fifth top donor in the 2000 election, of course, supported the Clintons. And in 2001 and 2002, he was the very single largest donor to the Democratic National Committee, with $10 million. So he is definitely a player, and like I say, even though dollar-wise he doesn't match Sheldon Adelson, his particular view and his pro-Zionist policies have a huge impact in the American election cycle, in American politicians, and particularly in the Democratic Party. In 2002, he gave the Democratic National Committee $7 million for their new headquarters building, and then donated $2 million to the Bill Clinton Library. In 2004, he contributed to the George W. Bush re-election campaign. So as I pointed out, like with Sheldon Adelson and a lot of other pro-Zionists and a lot of other people in American politics and corporations, he covers his bets, hedges his bets, and contributed to George Bush as well as the Clintons, because he wins either way, because the policies of the Democrats and the Republicans are no longer very distinguished from each other. And in 2004, Hillary Clinton described Saban as a good friend, which is an understatement. And in 2008, Saban supported the Hillary Clinton campaign along with Steven Spielberg and other pro-Zionists in Hollywood. And he was also involved in the 2008 controversy of Jewish donors telling Pelosi to stay out of the primaries and clear the way for Hillary Clinton. So I would say that is a pretty huge impact on the American election cycle when he can make those sort of changes just because of his influence. In 2002, he gave a $13 million grant to create a think tank about Middle Eastern policy at the Brookings Institute. So once again, we have him able to just make a huge donation and create a pro-Israel, pro-Zionist Middle East think tank that's part of this Brookings Institute in the United States. And therefore, Israeli policy gets represented right in the midst of our own government. And in 2006, he came out and said, quote, "When I see Ahmadinejad, I see Hitler," unquote. So he's privy to the same kind of extremism that we see from other Western puppets and the likes of Benjamin Netanyahu. And of course, as I pointed out in many videos, when you make these Hitler comparisons, whether it's in the U.S. election cycle now with Trump or Ahmadinejad during negotiations with Iran and talking with Israel, Hitler's the best one to pull out of the hat if you want to demonize somebody and shut down any sort of rational conversation. And then we also have the Saban National Political Leadership Training Seminars that take U.S. college students into intensive pro-Israel advocacy. And so far, 300 students from 100 campuses have been run through this program. So once again, and I'm going to do other videos on this and have done some already, but the fact that he can create these leadership training seminars in the U.S. and basically be a propaganda bullhorn for the Israeli government, in all intents and purposes, it's part of the Israeli government operating on U.S. college students and U.S. college campuses. And like I say, it's their single purpose is pro-Israel advocacy. It has nothing to do with what's good for the United States necessarily. And then in 2009, Saban was also involved in the Jane Harmon AIPAC controversy, and they once again threatened to withhold Jewish donations if they didn't back the Jane Harmon election to an intelligence post. And like I mentioned earlier, quoting Sheldon Adelson too, we have tons of quotes from Saban about what his allegiances are. In the New York Times in 2004, he said, quote, "I'm a one-issue guy, and my issue is Israel," unquote. Once again, no mention of what might be good for the United States, and is unabashed in his spreading of Israeli propaganda. And for some reason, I should go on a tangent a little bit here. For some reason, when it's Israeli propaganda, a lot of Americans don't seem to mind it, but I do. I think of a lot of other countries like Saudi Arabia who do actually have propaganda in the United States. They seem to be more concerned about that than somebody with Israel, like Israel, that has lots of organizations, which I'll do a separate video on, that influence American popular opinion and directly influence our elections. I noted in my research, for example, Saudi Arabia doesn't really have any organizations in the United States so much, or certainly ones that are effective. So they actually hire directly U.S. public relations firms and law offices to spread their propaganda. But I'll get into that more on a video about Muslim money going into the American election cycle that I'm going to do today as well. And then Saban also is the founder of the Saban Institute for the Study of the American Political System at the University of Tel Aviv. So that's also very telling, the fact that he's set up an institute in Israel that's all about the study of the American political system and influencing the political system in the United States. I find that actually rather shocking. Imagine if the United States had a institute for the study of the Israeli political system, where people were taught basically how to undermine the sovereignty of Israeli institutions in order to perpetrate American propaganda. Then another very interesting tidbit, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to go a little more in depth on Saban, is because Saban owns Univision Communications Incorporated. And so an interesting tie-in with the recent debates that were held on Univision, particularly when Saban, a huge Democratic supporter and a supporter of the Hillary Clinton campaign, can have his network host the debates. But of course, that's no different than the other major networks in the United States, who are also owned by conflicted interests. So, once again, Saban, like Sheldon Adelson and a lot of the other elites who want to influence public opinion in elections, he tried to buy the LA Times, Time Magazine, Newsweek, but was turned down. So anyway, they realized they need to not only be entertainers, but media moguls in order to spread their message. And he also is a mover and shaker. Another little story that came out about Saban in 2000 is he stopped the sale of an airborne radar system to China until after the elections in the United States. So interesting, once again, that somebody like this could be directly involved in U.S. negotiations during an election cycle, U.S. negotiations with China, and or corporate sales to a country like China. So once again, showing how much influence he has. And so also interesting too that Saban, like Sheldon Adelson, is very specific about who in the party he supports. So Saban has not been a supporter of Obama. In fact, has never spoken to Obama since he's been elected, but of course is a vehement Clinton supporter. And Sheldon Adelson, likewise, is the supporters of people like Newt Gingrich, but not necessarily Mitt Romney, only to support Mitt Romney, and then is going to support Ted Cruz and Mark Rubio over Donald Trump, but now, of course, is warming up to Trump. And also probably we'd be fine if Hillary got elected too. And then there's a lot of that coming out in this election that a lot of people don't really seem to mind in the status quo, whether it's Hillary who gets elected or somebody like Cruz or Rubio. But unfortunately, they don't have that option anymore. So anyway, there's just a look at another mover and shaker in American election systems that happens to be a Zionist and a very pro-Israel dual citizenship figure, and who has poured millions into the American election cycle and distorts what American foreign policy should probably be. Anyway, I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.